There is a man standing at the edge of an empire that is quite literally falling apart around him. Plague is killing thousands a day. War is on every border. His own family has betrayed him. And yet every night he sits down and writes the same reminder to himself. Not about how to win, not about how to escape, but about how to remain unshaken. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and in 2026, drowning in notifications, comparison, and noise you never asked for, his 2,000-year-old notebook might be the sharpest tool you own. Today you're getting 12 of his sharpest lessons, and the lessons of two other men who mastered the same art, Epictetus and Seneca. Stay until the end, because lesson 12 is the one that changes how you see every single day you have left. Welcome to Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. This is the place where 2,000-year-old philosophy meets your very real, very modern life. No fluff, no vague positivity, just the tested, battle-hardened principles that helped emperors, slaves and statesmen build unshakable peace of mind, translated into something you can actually use tomorrow morning. If that sounds like what you need right now, hit subscribe, because we release videos like this every single week, and you don't want to miss the ones that come next. Let's begin. Why 2026 feels harder than it should. Before we get into the 12 lessons, I want you to notice something. You have more comfort than any generation in human history. Food arrives at your door in 20 minutes. Every question you've ever had is answered by a device in your pocket. And yet, be honest. Do you feel more at peace than your grandparents did? Or less? Most people feel less. And it's not because life is objectively harder. It's because the mind has never been asked to process this much input, this much comparison, this much choice, in this short a window of time. The Stoics never lived in our world, but they understood our exact problem before it had a name. The gap between what happens to us and how we let it affect us. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who later became one of history's most respected teachers, put it as simply as it's ever been put. It is never the event itself that disturbs us, but the judgment we form about that event. Read that again. Not the traffic, not the message left unread, not the boss's tone in that email. It's the story you immediately tell yourself about it. That single idea is the foundation everything else today is built on. So let's get into it, starting with the lesson almost nobody wants to hear first. Lessons 1 to 3. Mastering your own mind. Lesson 1. Control what is yours, release what isn't. Picture Elena. She's a project manager, 34 years old. And for the last 6 months she has been fighting a battle she cannot win, trying to control how her team feels about a company restructuring she had no part in creating. She loses sleep over it. She rehearses conversations that haven't happened yet. She's exhausted by 5 in the afternoon, every afternoon. One evening, a mentor asks her a simple question. Which parts of this can you actually change? Elena starts listing them. The restructuring, not hers to control. Her team's emotions, not hers to control. Her own preparation, her own tone, her own effort in the room, entirely hers. This is the Stoic dichotomy of control, and it is arguably the single most practical idea in the entire philosophy. Epictetus taught that some things are within our power, our judgments, our desires, our actions, and some things are not, our body. Our reputation, the outcomes others create. Peace begins the moment you stop investing your energy in the second category. Try this today. The next time something upsets you, ask one question. Is this actually mine to control? If it isn't, you're allowed to set it down. Lesson 2. Your reaction is the only thing that was ever really yours. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, because knowing the dichotomy of control is one thing. Living by it under pressure is another. James was cut off on the freeway on his way to a job interview, the kind of moment that used to ruin his entire morning. Old James would have arrived flustered, angry, replaying the moment in the parking lot, walking into that interview, carrying someone else's carelessness, like it was his own. But James had been practicing something different. In the 3 seconds after the near miss, he asked himself, Marcus Aurelius's own private question, the one the emperor wrote to himself, not to an audience. Does this actually harm the part of me that matters? Not my safety in the moment, that had already passed. His character, his composure, his ability to walk into that room and do good work. It didn't, so he let it go before the next red light. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about refusing to hand your entire day's mood to a stranger who will never know they had that power over you. Every time you feel that flash of anger rising, ask yourself the same thing James did, and notice how quickly it loses its grip. Lesson 3. Love the timeline you actually got. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about a truth most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. The events of your life are going to happen regardless of your resistance. Resistance doesn't change the outcome, it just adds suffering on top of it. This is where the Stoics introduce a phrase that's almost impossible to practice, but transformative when you do. Amor fati, the love of one's fate. Not resignation, not everything happens for a reason as a comforting slogan. Something far more active, a decision to meet whatever did happen with full engagement instead of half-hearted denial. Marco, a man in his late 50s, didn't get the promotion he'd worked 11 years for. The old story would have been bitterness for months. Instead, he asked one question that Stoic practice trains you to ask, given that this is now true, what is the most useful thing I can do next? 6 months later, that redirected energy became the reason he started the consulting practice. He now runs on his own terms. You don't get to choose most of what happens to you in 2026, but you get to choose whether you spend your energy fighting the timeline you're in or building the best possible version of it. Quick question for you, drop it in the comments. Which of these first 3 lessons is hardest for you to actually live by? I read every comment and I want to know. Lessons 4 to 6, mastering your emotions. Lesson 4, anger is never as justified as it feels. Seneca wrote an entire book on this single emotion because he considered it the most destructive of all the passions. Not because it's unjustified in the moment, but because it always demands a price higher than the offense that caused it. Elena, again, a few weeks after that first lesson landed, a colleague took credit for her idea in a meeting. The old Elena would have confronted him publicly, right there, fueled by adrenaline. Instead, she waited. Not out of weakness, out of strategy. Seneca's advice was almost mechanical in its simplicity. When anger rises, delay the response. Not because the anger isn't real, but because the version of you that responds in the heat of it is never your best negotiator. She raised it with him privately the next day, calm and specific. He apologized. Had she reacted in the room, she would have looked unstable, and he would have looked like the reasonable one. The delay didn't weaken her position. It's what won it. Lesson 5. Premeditatio malorum. Rehearse the storm before it comes. This is one of the most misunderstood Stoic practices, so let's be precise about it. Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, is not pessimism. It is not expecting the worst so you're miserable in advance. It's mental armor. Marcus Aurelius began mornings by reminding himself that today he would likely encounter difficult people, delays, and disappointment, not to dread the day, but so that when those things arrived, they arrived at a mind that was already prepared, not a mind caught off guard. James used this before that same job interview. He spent 2 minutes the night before imagining the hardest question they could ask, the version of the interview that didn't go his way, the possibility of rejection. Not to spiral, to rehearse. When the interviewer actually did ask a question that caught the other candidates off guard, James wasn't shaken. He'd already met that moment in his mind. Try this tonight. Before something that makes you nervous tomorrow, spend 90 seconds imagining it going wrong, and imagine yourself handling it anyway. You'll walk in steadier than you think. Lesson 6. What you fear losing, you never actually owned. This lesson is the hardest one in this entire video. and I want you to really sit with it. The Stoics taught that everything you have, your job, your health, your relationships, even the people you love most, are on loan. Not because the universe is cruel, but because that's simply the honest shape of reality. Epictetus used the metaphor of a traveler at an inn. You don't own the room, you're passing through it, and the wise traveler enjoys the stay without clinging to it as permanent. This isn't meant to make you love people less. It's meant to make you love them more, with full attention right now, instead of half attention while you're mentally elsewhere. Marco's father passed away 2 years ago. What steadied him afterward wasn't the idea that the loss didn't hurt. It was the recognition that he had spent the final decade actually present with his father, precisely because he never took the relationship for granted as something guaranteed. Nothing here is promised to you either. Not your health, not your career, not the people at your table tonight. That's not a threat. It's an invitation to stop sleepwalking through the time you do have. If this one hit you, let it sit for a second before you keep watching. And if you're finding value in this so far, a like genuinely helps this reach someone else who needs to hear it today. Lessons 7 to 9, Mastering Your Character. Lesson 7, Virtue is the only wealth that can't be repossessed. Seneca was, by the standards of his time, an extraordinarily wealthy man, and he was honest enough to admit the discomfort in that, given everything he taught about detachment from material things. His resolution wasn't to reject wealth entirely, it was to hold it loosely enough that losing it wouldn't destroy him. The Stoic hierarchy of value is simple, even if it's hard to live by: character above comfort, integrity above image, virtue above victory. Everything else, money, status, applause, is what they called a preferred indifferent. Nice to have, never worth trading your character for. Elena was once offered a shortcut, a way to hit her quarterly numbers by quietly overstating a report. Nobody would likely double-check. She didn't take it, not because she was certain she'd get caught, because the version of herself that took it wasn't a version she wanted to go home to. Ask yourself honestly, is there a shortcut in your life right now that would cost you something money can't buy back? Lesson 8. Discipline is just self-respect in practice. Marcus Aurelius woke before dawn most mornings, and by his own written admission he often didn't want to. He reminded himself in his private notebook, the same one you're hearing from throughout this video, that he wasn't put on this earth to stay warm under blankets, but to do the work only he could do. This isn't about punishing yourself into productivity. It's about recognizing that every time you keep a small promise to yourself, the workout you didn't feel like doing, the message you sent instead of avoiding, the hard conversation you finally had, you're building evidence that you can trust yourself. And self-trust, more than any external achievement, is where real confidence actually comes from. James started running at 5:30 every morning, not because he loved running, but because he wanted to prove something to himself before the world had a chance to test him. 6 months in, the running mattered less than what it built in him. A person who does the hard thing first, consistently, on days nobody's watching. Lesson 9. Judge yourself by your effort, not your applause. Here's a trap almost everyone in 2026 falls into. Measuring your worth by metrics you don't control: views, followers, promotions, other people's approval. The Stoics drew a hard line between what depends on you and what depends on the audience. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should concern ourselves not with what people say about us, but with whether what we're doing is actually good, true, and within our control to do well. Marco spent a year building his consulting practice with almost no visible traction, a handful of clients, a website nobody was finding. The old Marco would have called it failure. The Stoic-trained Marco asked a different question. Was the work itself honest, useful, and done to the best of his ability? It was. That became enough to keep going, and the traction eventually followed, but it was never the reason he kept showing up. Applause is not evidence of good work. Its absence is not evidence of bad work either. Judge the effort. Let the world catch up whenever it's ready to. What's one area of your life where you've been measuring yourself by the wrong scoreboard? Tell me in the comments. I want to see how many of us are carrying that same weight. Lessons 10 to 12. Mastering your life. Lesson 10. You are not behind. You are exactly on time. Comparison is arguably the defining disease of 2026. Everyone your age seems to have hit a milestone you haven't. Seneca warned about this exact trap too. 1,000 years before social media existed, he observed that most people waste the only life they have preparing to live a different one, always waiting for some future point to actually begin. Elena turned 34 the same month. A college classmate sold a company for 8 figures. For one evening, she let the comparison in, and it cost her the entire night's sleep. The next morning, she asked the Stoic question instead. Whose race am I actually running? Not his, hers. Built from her decisions, her values, her definition of a life well lived, not his highlight reel. There is no universal finish line you're behind on. There's only the question of whether today's version of you is living in alignment with what you actually value. That's the only race that was ever real. Lesson 11. Let death teach you how to live. This sounds heavy. It's actually the opposite. Memento mori, remember you will die, was not, for the Stoics, a morbid obsession. It was a tool for clarity. Marcus Aurelius kept a servant whose job, according to tradition, was to remind him regularly of his own mortality, not to frighten him, but to keep him honest about what actually mattered while he still had time to act on it. Because here's the truth almost nobody wants to say out loud. Most of what stresses you today will be completely forgotten in 5 years. The traffic, the comment section, the argument about something small, but the conversation you keep avoiding with someone you love, the work you keep postponing until someday, those are the things that mortality makes urgent. James lost a close friend suddenly, far too young. The year before he started running at dawn. It wasn't a coincidence. Death, faced honestly instead of avoided, has a way of burning off everything unimportant and leaving only what actually matters. You don't need a tragedy to access this clarity. You just need to genuinely ask yourself, right now, if this year were your last, what would you stop tolerating? Start there! Lesson 12. The obstacle is the way. Lesson 12. The obstacle is the way. This is the lesson I promised you at the very beginning. The one that changes how you see every day going forward. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that has outlived empires. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every obstacle in your path is not a detour from the life you're supposed to be living. It is the material of that life. The only material you actually get to work with. Think back across every story in this video. Elena's team conflict became the proof of her leadership. James's near miss on the freeway became a test he passed. Before an interview he needed to be calm for. Marco's missed promotion became the business he now owns outright. None of them got the life they expected. All of them built something better from the obstacle itself, because they refused to see it as only an obstacle. Whatever is standing in your way right now, the job that isn't moving, the relationship that's strained, the body that isn't cooperating, the year that hasn't gone how you planned, it is not a sign that you're off track. It might be the exact material your best chapter is going to be built from. The only question left is whether you're willing to pick it up and start building. Let's bring this all the way back to where we started. A man writing to himself by candlelight. In an empire on fire around him, choosing every single night